I just turned 49, right? So I'm sort of in the throes of perimenopause myself. And the more that I A, experience this and B, research it, the more I'm just sort of blown away by how much estrogen does for us, right? Like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think so much of us were just taught about estrogen, progesterone, not even testosterone necessarily, right? But that these are just like our regulators of our cycle and that's all they do. And gosh, surprise, they do so much more.
But wait, there's more.
And
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. And so I just learned this, honestly, probably like 6 months ago. Our mitochondria have estrogen receptors on them. Like, mind blown, right? So clearly there's some link there, right? Between energy production and our mitochondria.
It isn't about being perfect. It's about being better. Hello, my name is Dr. Stephanie Stima, and I host expert discussions with thought leaders in all facets of health, including nutrition, fitness, hormones, stress management, performance, recovery, longevity, health span, and energy production. On this show, we discuss complex science, but then we also alchemize it into actionable, everyday living. The ultimate goal with the show is to assist you in making informed decisions about your health and to catapult you into being the hero in your own life. Hello, Betties. Welcome back to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. And today we go on a journey through skin health, muscle health, and immune health in the throes of perimenopause and menopause. My guest today is Jen Scheinman. She is a registered dietitian, boasting over 2 decades of expertise in nutrition and wellness. She has a master's degree in integrative and functional nutrition, coupled with advanced training in bioenergetics, which is going to provide her with an understanding of the complex interplay between nutrition, cellular health, and longevity. She's currently the senior manager of Timeline Nutrition, where she plays a role in educating healthcare professionals and consumers about the significance of cellular health and the interplay of cellular health and urolithin A. And this is what we talked about today. We talked about skin health, the changes that we see in the perimenopausal and menopausal woman's skin, including dryness and itchiness and sensitivity and hyperpigmentation. We talk about the role of estrogen, and we talk about the role of urolithin A in being able to improve collagen synthesis, the skin's ability to hold on to moisture, among many other things. And then we also get into muscle. Not a new topic for you, Betties, I know, but sometimes we need to explore muscle in a variety of different ways and a variety of different perspectives and vantage points. And we talk about urolithin A and how it helps with muscle strength and how it helps with aerobic capacity and endurance. And Jen is involved in and is very well versed in some of the human studies that Timeline Nutrition has done. And she actually gave us a little bit of a sneak peek, an exclusive, if you will, on some of the studies that have not yet been published at the time of this recording on athletes, on high-level Olympic athletes, as well as when we look at the urolithin A and the effects that it has on the immune system. So fascinating conversation. If you are someone who's noticing changes in your skin, in your muscle, we actually also talked about joints and bones and tendons, in your immune system, all of that, we're going to talk about how urolithin A can play a role in it. And just so you are aware, if you do decide that you want to take a look at urolithin A and try it for yourself, there is a special code for the listeners of the show, for my wonderful Betties, light roast to dark roast Betties alike. Just head to timeline.com/better, and you are going to enjoy 10% off of any order there. So please enjoy my conversation with Jen Scheinman. All right. Jen Scheinman, welcome to the Better Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here as well. It's just been a pleasure to meet you and join you on your show.
Thank you. Yeah, we are going to be talking all about perimenopausal and menopausal health, specifically as it relates to skin changes and muscle and body composition changes. And we're going to be talking about a compound that I have been very interested in the last couple of years now, urolithin A. We've done a podcast already with Dr. Anurag Singh, and we'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. But just as a point of review, or for for those of you that haven't listened to that podcast with Dr. Singh, what is urolithin A? Where do we find it in the body? Because we make it in our body. And then what does it do?
So I think it's great to do this sort of review, even if, it's a kind of almost a complicated subject, right? How it works and what it does. So I think it's always beneficial to have a review. So I like to always start with what it is. It's a postbiotic nutrient. So that means we don't actually get it directly from food. Instead, we need a healthy gut microbiome to make that. So most people are very familiar, I'm sure your listeners especially, with the importance of gut health, right? And that we have these microbes that live inside us. And what we're learning is that these microbes create these super powerful nutrients or molecules that benefit us. And I like to say it in I like to use very simplistic analogies because I think a lot of people that clicks with them. So it's almost like we give our gut microbiome room and board. They get to live inside our gut and they get to eat some of the things we can't digest, like fibers or these molecules called polyphenols. And they pay us back in these nutrients called postbiotics. And that's what urolithin A is. So it's important to remember you don't get it directly from food. Your gut will make it from specifically these polyphenols that are in foods like pomegranates, dark-skinned berries, and nuts. They're called specifically oligotannins. That's a type of polyphenol that we get it from. And we've studied populations, and most people they don't have the right gut microbiome to make urolithin A. So even if they're eating those dietary precursors, they're not getting enough of it. And so the next question is, well, okay, what does this postbiotic do? How does it help me? And it works. I'm going to kind of take your listeners on a journey to high school biology, but hopefully not scare them with any post-traumatic stress, right? But we all learned about what we think of the powerhouse of the cell, right? The mitochondria. And again, in very simple terms, these are like factories that live inside your cells and they generate the energy that your cells need. So every cell except our red blood cells has these energy generators. And it doesn't matter if it's a skin cell or a brain cell or a muscle cell. For those cells to do their job, they need energy coming from the mitochondria. But the issue is as we get older, our mitochondria decline. So those factories aren't, they're damaged. They're not putting out enough energy. And so this postbiotic urolithin A, what it does is it helps to recycle those mitochondria. So basically, think of demolishing a factory and building a new one so you can have more cellular energy.
And so this is the technical term, I guess, I love to call my dark roast Betties who want to know every mechanism, every enzyme. This is mitophagy you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So many people are familiar with autophagy. I think with the fasting community growing, understanding that is a recycling process that happens in the cell. So mitophagy is just a very specific targeted form of autophagy that happens on the mitochondria. So absolutely, you're right.
Okay. And so is it that as we age, we are producing less and less of this postbiotic? Is that a function of modern life and sort of the environmental, we'll say, toxic soup that modernity can sometimes offer, or is it just as a function of aging we are becoming, like, the mitochondria is becoming less efficient, or those two things together? Are there genetic SNPs that are involved that will upregulate or downregulate the microbiome's ability to produce these postbiotics?
So that is a wonderful question and a question that I think science hasn't quite answered yet. So we do know, to your point, that the microbiome does change with age. But if you take a step further back and we think about which microbiome, which species or strain is making urolithin A, we're actually not sure yet. We know that people who tend to have much more robust and healthy microbiomes tend to be producers. We know that Akkermansia and some of these staple foundational, health promoting strains tend to be there, but we haven't linked it specifically to a strain. So it sort of becomes difficult to then say, well, what's causing the strain to not be there or not, right? We know that just in our environment, like for myself, for example, I was a C-section baby and I was bottle fed. So I probably didn't even start off life with, those early days when I was getting my microbiome kind of inoculated from my mom. We also know that it's a very toxic environment. People aren't eating enough fiber. They aren't eating enough foods that are nourishing the microbiome. So there's a lot of things I think that are going into why don't we make it? And age absolutely might be a part of that. We just, as far as I'm aware, there is no studies that really have shown that. But I think that's something I'm always very curious about. Like my grandmother lived to 101. I like
Yeah.
wonder if she was a natural producer of urolithin A.
And my
right?
grandmother had every morning she had bananas and blueberries in milk. Like that was her cereal, quote unquote, right? So
Yeah.
always had blueberries until, her last day. The other question I have about the microbiome and these postbiotics is, do we know, so very early science, if I'm hearing you correctly, do we know if there's any ethnic or regional areas where we see better urolithin A production, or again, not sure yet?
We are looking into that, and there definitely seems to be regional differences. And that's, again, no surprise based on diet. So in the United States, we seem to be the worst producers. When we look at people in France, we see that they are much better producers. I know we've looked at populations in India, and they are not great producers, probably because, which is interesting because I think of them as having a very polyphenol rich
Yeah, yeah,
diet,
yeah.
but from what has been explained to me is that they're very heavy handed with antibiotic use early in life. And so that might be contributing to it.
Mhm.
So there definitely seems to be variations. Again, I suspect that's based on what diet quality. I bet if we looked at more Mediterranean, and sort of traditional, places where they still sort of eat more traditional whole food diets, I would bet they're much better producers.
Yeah, and I was at the grocery store just the other day, and blueberries, at least right now, was like $8. So it's also like, goodness grief, like it was for a pint. It was like $8. And I was like, well, I guess I'm spending $16 on blueberries today. Like, how ridiculous is that? So there's also, in the United States, and I'm in Canada. I will refrain from making a political comment here, but I'll just say that inflation in the West, in the West right now, I know that we see it coming down, and some of these really very healthy foods, which are not subsidized by the government, do not have, there's no big blueberry, lobby groups in Washington or in Ottawa. These are often some of these fruits that are, or these foods rather, that can become very expensive for families to acquire on a regular basis.
For sure. And those foods, go bad so quickly.
Yeah.
It's, not to take a tangent, but I think, when we are thinking about, foods, frozen berries are a great way to kind of have them seasonally, because they're sort of picked at the time of, when they're ripest and frozen. And that makes a much more affordable way to at least keep them as a staple in the winter months. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially if you're looking for organic and you're not
Yeah.
doing, conventional, it can be real expensive. And if that's going to sit in your drawer and go bad,
Yeah. It's like, why? It's just like,
that's a
throw it out
challenge.
while you're checking out,
Yeah.
right? I love actually what you
Yeah.
just said is super pro tip. That is like one of the biggest action items that you can take from the show. We've not even gotten started yet, is buy your fruits frozen. I love that because, to your point, they pick them right at the end and then they flash freeze them, and then they're so tasty. Always more tasty than the fresh. So really love
Absolutely.
that. You get cherries that way, strawberries, all the things.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that we have an understanding around urolithin A, it's this postbiotic produced in the gut microbiome. Let's talk a little bit. I wanted to bring you on to talk about specifically some of the challenges that perimenopausal and menopausal women face. And there are a plethora of verticals that we can talk about, but the two that I'd like to hone in on today is the changes that we see in our skin health, and then the changes that we see in our musculoskeletal and musculoskeletal system. So let's
Yeah.
start with skin. And I wanted to start here because I am constantly asked, what do I do for my skin? What is my skin routine? What is my morning routine? What is my evening routine? And I started off at the beginning of this year really making a promise to myself to figure out what are some of the best products on the market that are going to give me literally the best skin ever. I want the best skin that I've ever had in my life. I'm 46, I'm almost 47. I want to make this happen. And one of the products that has come into rotation and has stayed in rotation, very important point, because lots of things have come in and then they've just gone right out because I didn't see any change. One of them that has come in is this skin serum, and we'll talk about some of these products that contain urolithin A. So before we get there, let's talk about the changes for a menopausal woman. What does she see in her skin changes? Maybe we're talking about 40s, and then of course when she becomes menopausal at some point in her 50s.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, so many changes, right? I just turned 49, right? So I'm sort of in the throes of perimenopause myself. And the more that I A, experience this and B, research it, the more I'm just sort of blown away by how much estrogen does for us, right? Like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think so much of us were just taught about estrogen and progesterone, and not even testosterone necessarily, right? But that these are just like our regulators of our cycle, and that's all they do. And gosh, surprise, they do so much more.
But wait, there's more.
And
Yeah.
I know, yeah. And so I just learned this honestly, probably like 6 months ago. Our mitochondria have estrogen receptors on them, like mind blown, right? So
Hmm.
clearly there's some link there, right, between energy production and our mitochondria. And so a lot of the research I was diving into on that is a lot of it is in animal models and hasn't really shown, we haven't seen actual evidence yet in humans on the role of sort of estrogen mitochondria, but there's definitely a link for sure. So in the skin, I think really the first thing that we start to see, and honestly, this is before even our hormones start changing, right? We start to see aging in our body, in all of our systems. It really starts to happen in our 30s. When we look at these biological hallmarks of aging, and this is outside of estrogen, which we'll dive into, a lot of these processes, these cellular changes that we see in our muscle, that we see in our skin, that we see in our immune system, they start much younger than we think. When I was in my 20s and thinking about aging, I was like, oh, I'll deal with that when I'm like 50. No, we should be thinking about that in our 20s and 30s and how we can then be in a much more healthy, advanced state when we turn 50. So estrogen in skin plays a number of roles, no surprise. So one of the things that it does is it helps with collagen formation. So one of the first things we start to see is the changes in fine lines and wrinkles. We start to notice that. And I think skin is kind of,
It's less
unless you
plump.
throw out
Like it's less, you push it and it
it,
doesn't quite bounce back
yeah,
immediately. Yeah.
it's that I notice, like, I call them like my jowls, like a little like sagging,
Mm-hmm.
the little crow's feet are more
Yeah.
pronounced. And I even noticed that, like, when I used to use like creams and lotions, and I also like have been in love with our skincare products as well, and it's really changed the way that I focus on my skin health. But when I was using sort of lower quality ingredients, like I would notice even those little like fine lines and wrinkles that used to plump when I put a moisturizer on, like by the end of the day, that was like all that benefit was gone. So there's that, elasticity, there's that glow, but there's also our skin. I think we forget this often, is that our skin is an organ, right? And it has a job to do besides just how we look. So it is a barrier to environmental, pathogens. So that skin barrier weakens as we get older. Our skin gets thinner, it bruises more easily. If we get cut, it doesn't heal as easily. And all of these are tied to the declining estrogen that's happening, in our skin cells and throughout our body.
Yeah. And to your point, like I always call estrogen, it's the MVP for skin health, right? It's the collagen synthesis, as you were saying, antioxidant defense, maintaining the mitochondrial health in the skin with the estrogen receptor, just to paraphrase what you were just describing there. And then oil gland regulation as well. Like a lot of women will say that their skin just feels drier. And part of that's testosterone, right? Because we know testosterone
For
upregulates the
sure.
sebaceous glands, et cetera. I have teenage boys, so I'm very, very aware of they're very much surging testosterone and some of the
Yes.
effects that can have on their skin. So the declining testosterone and the declining estrogen for a woman often leaves her skin feeling very dry. Let's talk a little bit. So
Dries.
the dryness and itchy. That's the other thing, is very itchy.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say that too. There's all sorts of, like, I don't want to call them, let's call them uncommon symptoms that are still symptoms, right? So there's many women notice dryness, but other women start to notice acne happening at this point in their transition.
Hmm.
Itchy skin, I hear that so often. And just sensitivity, like skin that didn't used to be sensitive just feels very sensitive to products, or that's something I've just even noticed. Like I will wake up and just sometimes I'm like, my skin feels more sensitive today. I don't know what that is.
Mhm.
It's a little more red. It's a little more pinkish. It just feels a little raw.
Yeah. And the skin is going to now lose its ability to retain moisture, right? If it's feeling very dry, very itchy. A lot of women will say their ears get very itchy, which I think is very interesting as well. Sensitivity, as you mentioned. And then the other thing is hyperpigmentation or just uneven pigmentation. I have a little bit of that from, worshiping the Italian sun, sort of along the cheeks, a little bit of darkness kind of along the bone that still thankfully covers up with a little bit of tinted sunscreen. But still noticing like that uneven pigmentation, melasma for some women. Where and why is that happening for women in perimenopause and menopause?
So I think, there's two things to remember, right? One is that part of that also is due to the changes in hormones, right? As women who were pregnant, a lot of women notice also melasma, dark spots happening as their hormone levels surge and change. The other thing that we also have to remember is that, we're in our 40s and our 50s, and we're also now seeing the accumulation of sun damage, which is actually the number one cause of skin aging. So 80% of our skin aging isn't really from it. I think because we go through a bit of a drastic change in our hormones, it feels like everything is happening at once. But 80% of skin aging is really from the damaging effects of our environment. And so then when you kind of add that on to the changes that are happening with estrogen, it really starts to feel like an accelerated process. So a lot of those dark spots may also just be, I'm in your same age group, right? I was out there with the reflectors and the baby oil. And so I think it's also just the sun damage is now really starting to.
And so how can let's tie this back to urolithin A. So these are some of the changes that we see in menopause. Why is urolithin A significant here for skin health? What are some of the proposed benefits that we can either through, and you can tell me if it's better to orally, to take urolithin A as a supplement or to topically apply it to the skin, maybe both. What are some of the benefits of urolithin A in terms of mitigating or attenuate to, improve some of these skin related changes that we see in menopause?
That is really the secret to the success here. So it is making mitochondria. We're able to recycle them, revamp them, surge up the energy that's happening inside the cell. And the way to really best do it is topically. Now, there first was an oral supplement that was on the market, and feedback, even though it wasn't studied for skin, feedback was happening like, wow, my skin is starting to look better. And so that really prompted this idea of like, well, can we, does it work topically? Different mechanism of action, which obviously we'll clear up, but kind of I think of it as like vitamin C, right? We know we have to eat vitamin C. It's an antioxidant. We know it has benefits when we consume it internally, but we also know that vitamin C makes a really potent topical.
Yeah.
It's localized on the skin. And that's how I think of urolithin A. So we are looking at doing a study that would actually look at a benefit from doing both the dietary supplement and the skin. And personally, that's where I think the best bang for your buck is going to come, because you're targeting, the entire body, and you're targeting sort of all layers of the skin that way. But for the quick, localized, potent skin benefits, it's going to be with a topical application. And that's where, our development of our skin line really looked at doing high quality research on the topical application of urolithin A. So the skin, the dietary supplements, we don't have as much research yet in terms of skin. Great research in other parts of the body.
Yeah. And it would be interesting if you are designing studies and taking suggestions, which I'll just give my 2 cents.
Yeah, we always are.
So if you have the one that you just described, which is supplementation and the topical, it would also be nice to see just the topical compared with that group. And then just the supplementation compared with that group, and then either a placebo or a nocebo compared with all of them to see if there's any. And that is a very expensive, I recognize that is a very expensive study to run, but that would be really interesting to know if do we need to be like applying it topically and then taking the supplement internally? Does that give you a statistically significant improvement over just the topical application? Can we just take the supplement? If you're a supplement person and you just get in the habit, you go every day to your supplement closet and you take your supplements and the urolithin A is there and you just take it, that's just the way you're going to do it. It will be interesting to be able to compare those groups. And then, of course, to someone who thinks that they're taking something, but they're not. Yeah, that would be an interesting study for me to see, because I love the analogy to vitamin C. And side note, I haven't found a really good vitamin C serum. So if you have recommendations, I'll take them. I find that they just sit on my skin and they get tacky. I don't know why.
They smell funny.
Yeah,
don't they smell funny to me? They smell funny. I
don't know. I'd rather
I haven't
squeeze a
found one
lemon
that
on
I
my
love.
face, or I don't know. I just need a good vitamin, which maybe Timeline can come up with one. I don't know if that's in the pipeline.
Well, we'll put it in the request. I know. I think Timeline's focus is to have urolithin A in everything, right? That's really because the power of it is so incredible. But I don't, maybe it's a vitamin C plus urolithin A serum. I'll put in a good word
Something.
and
Yeah. I
see
want the study first. Let
what
me
we
just
can
be, my
have. But
priorities is the supplement
for
and the
sure.
topical, you know, arguably statistically significantly more, giving you more bang for your buck than just one or the other. That would be my
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
And one of the things I'm curious to see too is, and as we dive into the research, I think this will showcase the commitment to science that Timeline does is, skin, sometimes that's very subjective, right? Like, I think I look better, or
Right.
like
Right.
my significant other told me I look better. And so the research that we do uses like, high tech imaging and is actually like measuring, wrinkle depth and wrinkle volume and is doing, cellular studies. So it would be really interesting. Yeah. I think to have very concrete evidence to show, because I think placebo, somebody might think it looks better,
Right.
right? That would be a placebo effect, but
Right.
I suspect we wouldn't actually see an improvement in wrinkle depth or see,
Yeah.
any of these genes that turn on, mitochondrial health or collagen, production are upregulated. So we'll hopefully we'll be back on in a little bit with a new
An
study for
updated
you.
study, yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the research that Timeline has done. There's three studies that I'd like to discuss. There was aging 1, aging 2, and then the photo damage study. Why don't you walk us through? Let's talk about the aging one first, and then to your point around being able to measure results, let's talk a little bit about what they were able to find, and then we can also talk about the photo damage study, and again, what they were able to find with the dosing.
Yeah. So the, why I joined Timeline, honestly, is because the quality of research, I have not really seen that done in a supplement brand. And, supplements are the wild, wild west. I've been, in the field for over, 20 years. And what I've learned is that the skin industry is even more wild in terms of claims that they're making, in terms of how they study
Yeah.
their ingredients and, what they're kind of going to market with their, promises to the consumer. And so Timeline's very different. They took this same sort of approach, this very, high tech and serious approach to research with skin. So all of the trials, right? Well, there was several trials kind of looking at like the best dose in the skin line. And so all of the trials that we'll talk about all used 1% urolithin A. And that's what's in all of our products. So we do have 3%, I'm sorry, 3 different products, but all of them have 1% urolithin A, which we really seem to find to be the most efficacious. So the first study was really more of like a cellular study where we were looking at skin biopsies and looking at mitochondrial function that was happening inside these skin cells. And for any of your listeners who've already are familiar with the muscle story, right, it takes a little bit of time for that to work. The cool thing about skin is it happens so much faster. So what we started to see in just 72 hours were these markers of mitophagy are all upregulated in just a few days. So that I think is really pretty compelling, and that we see the cells, the fibroblasts, which are really important for creating collagen. They're healthier. There's better mitochondrial turnover that's happening inside those cells as well. So the next thing we really want to start thinking about is like, okay, so we've got better mitochondrial function. Well, what does that mean? What is that going to look like on my skin? What kind of, changes am I going to see? So this was a study of about 48, healthy women, ages like 50 to 75. So sort of in that, we weren't testing menopause and seeing if they were in menopause or not, right? But this is that age group, right? 50 to 75. It was an 8-week trial. It was randomized placebo control, which your audience knows that's the gold standard. And what that means in a skin study is it's actually a split face. So half the face got a placebo cream and the other half of the face got the urolithin A cream. And so we could then measure both on the subjective markers of aging and then also on the clinical markers of aging. And so after just 2 weeks of using the urolithin A, we saw these significant improvement, or we saw, visible markers of aging. So fine lines and wrinkles were all softened visibly. And then when we took that out to 8 weeks, what we saw were these significant differences between placebo. And then we did another study in our skin cells, which was again with these skin biopsies. This was an 8-week trial. And we looked at, so there's a lot of biology that's happening that, as we talked about earlier with estrogen, collagen production, that's kind of causing skin to age. And so this was, again, an 8-week trial. And we looked at the genes that are regulating collagen assembly, organization. And as we age, these are all downregulated. And we found that after 8 weeks that using this topical MitoPure again at 1%, it made our genes basically behave younger. So we were seeing that these genes that turn on collagen assembly, they're all upregulated there. So, that's pretty cool. And, 8 weeks is a pretty short time when you've been dealing with, a lot of progressive loss that's been happening, over decades of sun damage and just aging as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'll just paraphrase and read the summary here. Urolithin A at 1% significantly upregulated collagen synthesis pathways in human skin biopsies and led to a decrease in wrinkle depth and facial wrinkles. That's the what you were just talking about. And then in the second aging study, that larger study, topical application of urolithin A at again the 1% dose in different formulations, so either the day cream, night cream, and serum, led to significant wrinkle reductions compared to the untreated side, so half the face. Skin hydration was improved significantly as well. And then, now this is actually, these are the results from the photo damage study. So actually walk us through the photo damage study. So now we understand from the two aging studies that you just described that we see collagen synthesis upregulated. We see the hydration of the skin improving, the depth of the wrinkles, fine lines and wrinkles improving as well. And now let's talk about that hyperpigmentation or the photo aging or photo damage.
Yeah. Yeah. So this one wasn't specifically about the hyperpigmentation, but it was really about photo damage. So if we remember again, right, like 80% of our skin aging is coming from the sun, even if we're wearing sunblocks, right? We know that, I apply mine in the morning. I don't apply it when I go out for a walk in the afternoon. So we're constantly getting bombarded by, the damaging effect of the sun. And this study, what it looked at was exposing skin to UV light. So getting that irritation, that erythema, that inflammation that happens after we get exposed to the sun. And we applied either a placebo or we applied the urolithin A cream. And what we found was that inflammation, that erythema, that was all resolved much more quickly with the urolithin A cream. And so, again, we're seeing that this, photo damage is being resolved when we start using urolithin A in a topical.
And it was a significant decrease. It wasn't just like, oh, it's down 1% or 2%. It was down 14%, which is statistically significant. That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's so important to remember here too, and why this is such a standout and unique thing about urolithin A is when we think about a lot of the other active ingredients that we use for, anti-aging or whatever we want to call, right? Like retinol or even, alpha hydroxy acids, those types of things, that actually makes your skin more sensitive to the sun, right? You have to be really careful when you use those products and you go into the sun. And what we're seeing here is that not only is your skin not more sensitive to the sun, but it's actually rebounding from the damage of the sun even faster.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why they always tell you to take your retinol in the evening, right? So put your retinol on at night because, you're going to be hopefully sleeping in a dark room, not being exposed to the sun. So the skin is not going to be, potentially further damaged from that as well, because it essentially thins the skin out, which gives it more or leaves it more susceptible to that damage. Yeah. Yeah. So now with this photo damage study with the urolithin A, it doesn't matter, just to be clear, it doesn't matter what time of day we're putting the product on, because I use the serum in the morning. I also use the night cream at night, but it doesn't this is not the same as a retinol, let's say, or an AHA or a BHA where the skin, it's like it's almost like a bit of a mini chemical peel, right?
Yeah. No, not, it does not matter what time of day. And what we're seeing is another study that I think is on our wish list is actually doing like a head to head with retinol, because we know that that's for so long been like the gold standard in terms of, skin, aging, but it is really irritating for a lot of people. And this you can put on any time of day. You can use it multiple times a day. It plays nice with your other skincare ingredients and products that you might be using. And we've also studied, right, that there's no long-term like irritation or sensitization that's happening as you continue to use these products. So they're really safe. They're really well tolerated, but you're also getting that similar wrinkle reducing properties that you would see with some of these other more well-known skin ingredients.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was a couple months ago now, but I think that Europe now, if you go to Europe, you can't get the retinol that you can get in the States and in Canada. The strength, or maybe it's not retinol, maybe it's tretinoin, which is like the clinical or the stronger version of retinol. But you can no longer get that percent. You can only get that percentage in Canada and in the States. You can no longer get it in Europe because they have deemed it too dangerous for the skin, or they've deemed it, it thins out the skin too much. So now
even with a prescription, you can't get it. It's just not available at all.
Yeah.
Wow. I had not heard that, but I mean, it doesn't surprise me. But that's kind of scary to think that we're, slapping on all of this potentially really harsh ingredients.
Yeah, sometimes I find the West, like, we're so innovative, we're so progressive, and we're so innovative in some ways, and then in other ways, it's like we have our blueberries bust in from Chile or wherever they come from, or avocados are coming in like 3,500 miles before they get to us, and the glyphosate and all the things. But in some ways, we're really behind. Okay, so
think we like big guns. I was just gonna say, like we need and I don't mean that in like the US big guns, but like we like the like heavy lifters, right? Like it's like, oh, if a little bit works, like let's put on a lot.
Yes. Yeah. It's like more is more is more. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely like a consideration that happens with, and I think in skincare, and I know this is something I've been struggled with in the past, is like using all these different ingredients, right? Oh, well, retinol's supposed to be good, and vitamin C is supposed to be good, and hyaluronic acid is supposed to be good, and now urolithin A. So now I have this like skin routine, which is like, an hour procedure before I go to bed.
Right.
And I think what we're recognizing is actually simplifying things and just really honing in on these high quality, science-backed ingredients that are so powerful. Like, you don't need to have a routine that lasts, like, as I go through perimenopause, like, it's lucky if I can stay up past like 9 o'clock. So I definitely don't want to be doing a bedtime routine that's going to extend that any later than I have to, right? I can just kind of get something very powerful, very effective, and get my beauty rest.
Are there any other ingredients in these products that we're talking about, these timeline products, that are worth mentioning? So we've been talking about the urolithin A and the studies that have been done behind it. Certainly that's not the only ingredient in there. Is there anything else in there worthy of a mention?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 3 different products, which I think you alluded to. Our bestseller really is the serum. And it's this beautiful, like, milky, lightweight essence, basically. And we also have a day cream, and we also have a night cream. And each one of these has that 1% urolithin A, but they're also formulated with different actives. So it could be a complete skin set if somebody wanted to go that realm. So you had mentioned you use the night cream. I think the day cream is actually my favorite. But each of these have different ingredients. So kind of starting with the serum, that has, and actually all of our ingredients also have, besides urolithin A, they have what we call this antioxidant shield. So it has some niacinamide and trehalose, which is actually a type of sugar, but it has these wonderful sort of healing properties of the skin. And niacinamide is really well studied, also kind of helping with some of the aging pathways that happen in the skin cells, acts a bit like an antioxidant as well. So that's going to be in all of our products. And then in the serum, we have this like wonderful red algae, which is really deeply nourishing and kind of hydrating. And then we also have some peptides, which is just a very, powerful and trendy kind of thing that's in skin. Ours is not just trendy. Again, we're really looking at deep science. And what we find is that the peptides also help in sort of skin tightening and skin firming. So that's sort of the benefit of the serum. If somebody's kind of looking for an entryway into the MitoPure skin line, that tends to be the first one people go with, because you don't have to break up with your, favorite skincare products. It plays nice, even if you are on a, tretinoin, or you're on, an over-the-counter retinol, you can use it with that. You can use it with other things that you might be doing. The day cream, that's my personal favorite because it's so dewy and hydrating, but without being greasy at all. And I find that I live in the Northeast in New York, and I find that it's just thick enough to be moisturizing in the winter, but not greasy and over hydrating in the summer. And so that also has that niacinamide and that antioxidant shield, but it's got shea butter, which is really what's making it super nourishing and hydrating. And the other cool ingredient has got some green tea in it, which can really help with some of the irritation. A lot of as we talked about in the beginning, there's some redness and irritation and sensitivity that sometimes can happen as we go through perimenopause. So the green tea is really soothing. And then the night cream, that's also got in it squalene, which is for deep moisturizing. Wonderful to kind of keep on your skin at night and like lock in all that moisture. And some prickly pear extract, which actually can work a little bit as almost like a very gentle exfoliant overnight. So there's some great other ingredients inside all those products.
And if you're someone who travels, the airplane is the most drying. At least I find it doesn't matter how much water I drink, how many electrolytes, my skin is still like still feels a little bit dry. I love to use the night cream in like leading up to the flight and then on the flight itself. I know even if it's during the day, I like to put that on for long flights as well.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like we were getting into winter months. And so some people do like to use that night cream during the day.
Yeah.
And then there's people who maybe their skin is a little bit more oily or they just don't need that extra hydration. We'll use the day cream at night. So you can kind of play around and find a protocol that works best for your own skin.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I always sort of joke with my community. It's like, as long as I can look like a glazed donut, if my skin is like shiny, then I have done my job. And for that, I love the serum. That's like the base. And then I usually will put the night cream on, and I usually put it on during the day, if I'm being totally honest. I love the feeling of like super hydrated, super moisturized skin. I could probably get away with the day cream and be totally fine. To your point,
try the day cream because it is my favorite. It is my favorite.
I love. I have all.
But if you love the night cream,
I do. I love the night cream. Like if my face, like I said, if it's like Operation Glazed Donut, if I'm shiny, then I've done my job. Okay, so we have this topical application. Let's talk a little bit now around the other major topic I wanted to talk to you about. We talk about a lot on the show. This is a slightly different take, though, which is sarcopenia and loss of muscle mass as we age, osteopenia and loss of bone density as we age. Talk to us a little bit about those changes in perimenopause and menopause, which already my Betties are very familiar with. And what I'm really hoping for is the juxtaposition of how urolithin A can help with the mitigation of some of these losses that naturally occur in aging.
Yeah. So, again, it's coming down to this, like, who knew estrogen does all these wonderful things for us. And of course, there's changes in testosterone that are happening as well. But as our hormone levels start to decline, and we're also kind of getting into that fourth and fifth decade of life, which, outside of the changes that are happening in our hormones, we're starting to notice that this quality of our muscle cell is changing. And we're noticing that we are seeing, a change in muscle mass, in muscle strength. And if we're not doing things to every day counterbalance that through protein, through strength training, we are on this sort of road to frailty and hopefully not sarcopenia, right? This like very dangerous loss of muscle. And MitoPure actually, like the urolithin A studies started in the muscle space because it's just such a key component to how we age, right? It's, everything from, it's a whole organ system, right? Which helps to regulate our glucose metabolism. It sends out, markers and, inflammatory markers and messages to other parts of our body. And then, of course, just our daily movement, right? Can we get up off the floor? Can we move around? So there's just such a critical importance of muscle strength. And I'm so glad that people like you are really helping to lead the charge on, this is something we need to think about. So that's where urolithin A kind of started, was how can we help with muscle? And we also know that muscles are so highly dependent on energy that's coming from the mitochondria. So, if your Betties are kind of like learning more and more about the mitochondria, we don't just have one or two in each cell, right? Like we have hundreds to thousands depending on what the cell type is. So our muscles have potentially thousands of mitochondria in there, all generating energy for us to go about and do our daily activities. So the first studies really looked at the role of urolithin A on muscle health. And they started first with muscle biopsies, sort of similar to that skin, right? It's like, let's just make sure that in human tissue, this is triggering mitophagy. And so we looked at in humans.
It's important to also say this is not animal models. Yeah.
Correct. In humans and in real humans, not in human cells in a lab. Right. So we did this, as I said, through a muscle biopsy, which is not a particularly pleasant. I have not had one, but from what I understand, it's not a particularly pleasant test to go through. So this study was in older adults. So the average age was 70 and they were sedentary. And they were, the gold standard again of double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. And we gave them either 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams of urolithin A versus placebo. And those are the two sort of active doses that we recommend. And when we looked after 4 weeks, after a month, we saw that, mitochondrial function was significantly improved. So these genes that are turning on all these pathways that regulate that mitophagy, that mitochondrial turnover, those were all upregulated. So then, similar fashion to what we did in skin is like, well, okay, so what, right? What is that going to mean in terms of outcomes? How am I going to feel? And we did 2 different trials there, both sedentary populations, but one was middle-aged adults, one was older adults. And we looked at different varying, depending on which study it was, we looked on varying markers of muscle health, so muscle strength, muscle endurance. And in both of those studies, we saw these really robust, remarkable improvements in muscle strength and muscle endurance. So muscle strength, that was 16-week trial, 12% improvement in muscle strength without changing exercise, without changing diet. And that's pretty incredible. And then in our older adult population, so these were people who were over 65 and sedentary, we saw that with 1,000 milligrams, just after 8 weeks, we saw a 17% improvement in endurance. So meaning they could walk faster, they could do exercises, and they wouldn't fatigue and fail as quickly as they did before. So those were, I think, and this is truthfully why I'm here at Timeline, is just the impact that this has on people is not minimal. It's pretty impressive. And these studies are all, for those of your listeners who like to, we can link to all of this in the show notes. Like, these are studies that are all published in really well-respected, high-impact medical journals. So this isn't like, some small study that we just did in like, a garage lab. This was really done with some leading institutions throughout the world.
And I'll ask you a question that, again, the science might not be there, but this is just where my mind goes. Do we think that the muscle strength is occurring because there's an increase in motor unit recruitment? Is the motor unit size itself increasing? Like, basically, is it like the number of motor units that are being recruited? Is it the size of the motor unit? Like, why, how is that strength happening?
Yeah. The science that I'm aware of, like, we don't have that like deep mechanistic action nailed down yet. What we do know is that it is triggering a recycling process of the mitochondria that is very similar to the way, so exercise actually will help stimulate mitophagy. So we know that it's doing a similar pathway as we see during exercise. And what I personally think it comes down to is, again, this: if the muscle cell is acting in a more youthful way, if it has more cellular energy, it's going to be a stronger, healthier muscle cell. And that is, beyond that, I don't know that we really know where it's improving the muscle cell.
Yeah, that's the nerd question in me. It's like, is it the
Yeah,
cross bridges
yeah.
between myosin and actin? Like, how is it? I need to know. But
No.
science will tell us with time. And then, of course, the interesting application there is the studies were done in sedentary individuals, older sedentary individuals who, assuming they weren't former athletes or something like that. What would be really interesting is what happens now when you have someone who is taking urolithin A, let's say in supplemental form, and they are also resistance training. How does that compare to someone who is just resistance training, right? What is it the endurance that we've been talking about that is going to be upregulated, and by how much? The strength by how much and how quickly? And then does that help also with recovery? This is the one thing you probably, being in the same age range as I am finding in my 40s, mid to late 40s now, my recovery is not the same anymore. I do need to really double down on recovery practices. I can still push myself hard in the gym, and I do. And if I don't prioritize recovery, then I can't get back to the gym at the same frequency that I used to. So I'll need like another extra
Absolutely.
recovery day, or I'll need to do more sauna or more something else. So what do we know, if any, urolithin A with recovery? Again, it's that cycling process. Are we able to, is there any shuttling of lactic acid or lactate, anything like that, clearing of the muscle cell, sort of readying it to work again? And do we know of any, and maybe this is another, I'm putting in another request for timeline. Can we also do a study looking at the effects, so seasoned trainers, so someone like myself who's been
Mhm.
lifting for many years, what is the effect of urolithin A when you couple it with resistance training? Because I love that with sedentary individuals, it improves their strength and their aerobic capacity. And what about someone who has, through natural means, not necessarily supplementation, but who has naturally maybe reached or is close to the upper limit of their own mitophagy in the myocyte because they've been resistance training for so many years? Like, what does it do at that point?
Yeah. So that is where we're definitely kind of going. And we just completed, so not with strength, this was a more of a cardiovascular and aerobic training. We completed a study with Olympic trained athletes, because that was exactly the question, right? Is like, okay, we know that in older sedentary population, it's great, but what does it do for the people who are already physically active and are really at the peak of their performance? So this is unpublished data, and I know we are submitting this, and my hope is that it will be published at some point in 2025. So this was a study that was done with this leading sports dietitian out of Australia. She took her runners to training camp. So they, everything was controlled from diet to their exercise routine. And the real story there really was around recovery. So a couple of things was, looking at C-reactive protein, which we saw that come down also in our sedentary population. So a lot of these inflammatory markers came down, because right, when you're doing this intense workout, you're getting an exercise-induced inflammation, right?
Sure.
And so we want to have that quelled and resolved quickly. And so that seemed to be what was happening. The other interesting thing was we were seeing things like rate of perceived exertion. So, they were feeling like they were performing better. They were not feeling, that their workouts were as strenuous as the ones who were on placebo.
So the RPE went down.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I haven't seen all of the data. I can't remember, it's tricky when we're looking at like exercisers, right? Because we don't necessarily, we don't want to be a performance enhancing nutrient, right? Like, cause then that gets questionable, like for a professional athlete to take, right? But I think there were still some like very minuscule, which if like you're a runner, like seconds matter, right? Yeah. So improvements in their performance. Don't quote me on that one yet, but definitely recovery was the huge component here.
And creatine kinase, did they look at CK at all?
I believe they did look at that, and that I'd have to get back to you on that one. I believe that they did look at that and that was improved. Yeah. So, obviously aerobic training is very different than strength training. So would we see similar benefits? I don't know, but the feedback that we get from a lot of our clientele who've been on it for years is like they notice. And to be honest, that was the first thing I noticed is I don't feel as sore or sore at all after a day of heavy lifting. Yeah. I do feel like my recovery is better. So
that's my observation with big muscles. Like when I've had a really big, maybe it's high volume or it's high weight, depending on where I am in my cycle and how my menstrual cycle and how I'm lifting. I do notice it's like leg day and back day. If I do really like to take the Urolithin A, like the MitoPure supplement after the workout. So usually like the next, either later that day or I'll take it, the next day or whatever. And I do notice a difference in soreness. Like I do notice that I'm quicker to get back to because my legs are, I know when I've pushed myself, I know how sore I'm going to get. I know what I need to do to kind of get back in the gym. And I notice that the MitoPure does really help with that.
Yep. And that's the feedback we consistently get. So, so next study for our research team is let's look at it in strength and not just endurance exercise. But I know, we have a number of professional athletes that are on MitoPure. And, again, this is the feedback that we continue to get from them is recovery seems to be much improved.
And you mentioned dosage. So what is the active dosage? You said 500 mgs and then a gram. Did I hear you correct? Like 1,000 milligrams and 500 milligrams. And then what do we take for what? Is it just we take 500 milligrams all the time? Do we upregulate it when we know that we're going to be like we're doing leg day or something? Like what's the protocol or ideal protocol best practices there?
So, I think that sometimes people have to play around a little bit with it, but I will share what like my personal belief is and my experience, right? Because everybody is different. So, if you're sort of like, let's call it sort of like an average exerciser, you're sort of in midlife, you're healthy, right? I think 500 milligrams is plenty. You're just kind of trying to exercise to keep yourself healthy, kind of keep, your weight under control. You're not necessarily like trying to PR at the gym on, and or be, competitive in any way. I think 500 milligrams is plenty. Like that's what I take. My parents who are older, right? And I'm very concerned about their muscle and they work out as well. I have them on 1,000 milligrams. Now, for people though who are athletes and really are trying to maximize everything that they're doing in the gym, probably somebody like you, I think 1,000 milligrams is really where you want to be. So that study that I was alluding to in the Olympic athletes, that was a gram. So 1,000 milligrams. Okay. Yeah. We just completed another really interesting trial, which also should be published this year. different angle, but on immune aging and immune health. That was also with 1,000 milligrams.
Oh, let's talk about
So
that. Let's talk about the immune. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So this is also kind of like hot off the press study that was just completed. And again, this all comes back to these biological hallmarks of aging, right? And how our body ages. And we know that mitochondrial decline is a key component of that. And I'm sure your audience is probably super aware of this, and you probably talk about this, tons, is this whole concept of inflammaging, right? That our immune system just is sort of on overdrive as we age, and it's sending out lots of inflammatory markers. Again, our environment, our diet, our lack of exercise, all of these things are kind of contributing to this chronic low-grade inflammation that happens and contributes to age-related decline and age-related disease. So this was a 1-month study, which I think is incredible to see these stark improvements after just 1 month with 1,000 milligrams of urolithin A. And the study was done out of the Buck Institute of Aging, which is kind of one of the top leading
Blue
research
ribbon.
institutions.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Like really top of the top. And then out of Frankfurt, Germany, the Cancer Institute there. And what they did was with this like simple blood test, it's amazing. You can do this very deep phenotyping on all the immune cells. So you can look at, we have like, I think hundreds of different types of immune cells, and you can look at all these different immune cells, how they're numbered, how well they're functioning. And our chief medical officer, it happens to be an immunologist, but also has been doing research for, the bulk majority of his career. This was like, I think one of his favorite trials in the way that the results came out, is because pretty much every single thing that we looked at was improved here. So we saw the numbers of the immune cells that we were trying to target were improved. We saw that these immune cells had better mitochondrial function. We measured that by, free fatty acid oxidation and amino acid oxidation. We noticed that they had more biogenesis of the mitochondria. When we then took these cells and we exposed them to E. coli, a pathogen, they were more resilient and better able to fight those pathogenic infections. So, I think this is going to be kind of a game changer about how we think about immune health and immune aging. And, this is where, as we're recording, it's like October and everybody's starting to think about like seasonal immune, boosting. But I think we've got it wrong, right? It's really like, how do we think about our immune system as a declining system, just like everything else in our body? And how do we take care of that, just like we take care of our muscles, just like we take care of our skin, just like we take care of our brains?
Yeah. PSA, the flu is not a season.
No, I think we've learned that also after like the COVID pandemic,
exactly.
that we get sick all the time.
Yeah.
It's not seasonal. Yeah.
So that's okay. So I just have a few questions if I can. And you may not have the data. And if you don't have it, it's totally fine. We could just link to the study when it's published in the show notes. But in the immune study that you were just describing with the Buck Institute, were we seeing an upregulation of what we would call maybe our adaptive immune system? So like our T cells, our B cells, were we seeing like our antibody levels improve, our cytotoxic, like our our fighter cells?
T cells.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was the T cells were upregulated. So those sort of like early scavengers of, both cancer and infection. So I think it was specifically the like naive cytotoxic T cells, CD8 cells, actually.
Yep.
So those were all upregulated. And then,
gosh, there's so many applications. It kind of reminds me like, creatine used to be just like for the bros, it was like bros at the gym. If they were orange, it was like they definitely were taking creatine, and now it's like, and creatine is for women, and creatine for muscle, and creatine for bone, and creatine for brain, and creatine for perimenopause women. And I sort of feel like this is a similar trajectory. You started off in the muscle space. It's sort of this like, almost like, for the layperson, this sort of random compound, but we're seeing all of these different applications, all these different tentacles, all these different verticals that it can be applied to. We spent a lot of time talking about skin today, muscle, immune. I'm sure that there's a metabolic.
We're going brain health.
Yeah.
We're going into, there's even some incredible, if you're a researcher, your audience likes to do research on their own, right? And they go to PubMed and they do a search on urolithin A. The preclinical data is just incredible, right? So we've seen preclinical data in joint health, right? So the chondrocytes and helping to...
Oh, let's talk about that, because perimenopausal women always get frozen shoulder and hip and bursitis. Tell me about that.
So again, this is preclinical, so I cannot say that this is, happening
There
in,
has been no RCT.
again, in human.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no. So the RCTs right now are in, we just finished that immune skin muscle space.
Okay.
So that's what we know in humans. We know dosing, we know how long it takes. Where we're kind of starting to get excited is brain for sure. I haven't heard it specifically from the research group at Timeline kind of going into joint health, but there is, as I said, this great preclinical trial that looked in mouse models of osteoarthritis. And what that saw were not only the chondrocytes healthier, but the mice were more mobile and they had less, they had less sort of displays. I don't know how mice display that they're in pain, right? But they had less displays that they were in pain. So that was pretty incredible. There's some really interesting work coming out of a group out of Princeton, Colleen Murphy, looking at it for reproductive aging. And is this something that might be able to help with either fertility or as like an add-on to fertility treatment and fertility medicine? Wow. So it's just like, it's incredible. And it's all coming down. It's funny. I talk about this a lot. I talk a lot about the mitochondria, obviously. And I really think that mitochondrial health is kind of like the forefront of the next sort of aging awareness and health awareness, like almost like where gut health was like 15 years ago, right? This whole concept that we have these bacteria in our gut and what are they doing for us? And now everybody talks about gut health, right? And I think that because the mitochondria play such a role, whether it's the brain, whether it's the skin, whether it's the muscle, and this whole concept of cellular nutrition and cellular health, to your point, right? Like that creatine story, it's just going to be, I think, much more commonplace. So your audience is on this like cutting edge of the next generation, I think, of like where health and wellness is going.
When it comes to supplementation too, sometimes there's power in, there's like addition through subtraction. I recently, at the time of this recording anyway, moved to a smaller home. We sold our house, we moved to a smaller, cozier home. And I talk about this in our mini pause newsletter, and it was just like this perimenopausal, like I need to get rid of all the excess fat in my life. That's not on my body, but in my life. Like I have china that I never use. I have clothes, like I have shoes that pinch my feet and hurt me, and I'm never going to wear them again. And so I've just been like getting rid of everything. And I had this supplement closet, not like closet of stuff.
I can imagine.
And when we moved here, it was like, what's the stuff I actually use? And what's the stuff, people send me things all the time. And it's like, try this. And, so I just got rid of everything except for, it was like my vitamin Ds, my omega-3 fatty acids, MitoPure made the cut. And I have like a couple of other things that I kind of religiously use all the time. But sometimes it's like addition through subtraction. Like when I look at the amount of money that supplement closet was worth, that is just a waste. Like there's that meme, in the grocery store, like you're getting all the stuff in the grocery and then it just goes bad in your fridge. So you might as well just throw it out in the trash as you're checking out. That's sort of how I feel about that supplement closet that I had. It was like all this junk in here. Let me clear it out and just have the stuff that actually works, that I know, conversations like this that are scientifically validated. So I'm not wasting my time. I'm not wasting my money. It's not just expensive pee. And yeah, it just gives me like the bang for the buck that I'm looking for.
Totally. And I think that, one thing that's worth mentioning, right, is like, the science can say it all, but you have to feel it too, right? Like, and that's what we hear time and time again from our customers is just how incredible they feel. And there is a lot of like junk out there in terms of supplements. I'm sure like you were not the case of this, right? But people go and buy stuff on Amazon that, I think there's a study, I don't know, a few months ago, was looking specifically at like,
bunch of junk, but it's cheap.
Yeah. It was a study that like was looking at like melatonin supplements. And I think it was like the vast majority that they looked at had like either no melatonin or very little melatonin. We've actually investigated some other urolithin A supplements that are on Amazon, and same thing, like they don't have any urolithin A. And the other thing, I think, to your point of like cleaning out the stuff that doesn't work, like that was my experience with our skin line. So my background, the science, even if I didn't feel a benefit on MitoPure, the science of how it works on the mitochondria, I would still take it, right? Like I don't feel my vitamin D. I still
You
take
don't feel
it,
your
right?
mitochondria either. Like you don't feel mitophagy, but you know what's
Right.
happening,
But
right? Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
right? But the thing is with the skin, all the science in the world, if I'm not visibly seeing that on my skin, I'm not going to continue to use a
Yeah.
product. And
Yeah.
I do use all three of our products. And I've also like cleaned out a very expensive drawer of skin products that I don't know whether they were working or doing anything. And I've stopped using them
Yeah.
and really simplified my routine. I was like, oh, this bottle of vitamin C, right? Like I had like $140 bottle of vitamin C. I finished it, but then I was like, I don't feel like spending that right now. And I stopped
Yeah.
using it. And I'm like, my skin still looks great. Huh.
Yeah.
So I started to kind of weed stuff out and my skin is still looking amazing. And I think that that's really a testament to what's in, the great formulations. And again, the like, because we're sort of targeting that hallmark of aging, what's really happening at the cellular level with MitoPure, with Urolithin A, you're getting this sort of long-term benefit. So it's not just an immediate result you're seeing in terms of like moisture and shine. You get that wonderful, immediate result, but then you get the long-term benefit as well. So
Yeah.
it's definitely been simplifying my routine and my wallet is happy with that as well.
Yeah, there's something energetically giving when you open up your, if you have a drawer of skin products or whatever, or a little cabinet or whatever, wherever it is in your vanity, in your bathroom, that it's just your favorite stuff. Like you don't have to pick through all the Amazon junk to get, to get through.
Totally.
There's something
Or is it
energetically so life-giving about just seeing your favorite things. Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that they work and it's just a simple routine.
Yeah.
I think, we all, as we get older, just want to simplify things
Yeah.
and just not overcomplicate it and have things that work. And, I think one of the other things that's so nice about the skin products is they just feel very luxurious. Like you put them on, they melt in your skin right away. It's just a beautiful, like simple, but powerful routine.
Yeah.
And I think I said this earlier, right? Like I have a hard enough time staying awake. Like the last thing I want to do is go through a like complex skincare regimen at night before I go to bed. And so it's just so nice that all I do is wash my face. I put on the serum and I put a very generous layer of the night cream and like, that's it. I'm done. So it's really nice.
I love that. And like I was saying, I'm constantly pitched products and scent products and this is one of the companies that I'm really proud to associate with because your R&D, like the research and development and dev is there. You have the science to back it up. So tell people where we can find the Timeline skincare line, the supplement line. Where can we send us to websites and where can we find out more?
Yeah.
I know that there's going to be some of my, at least what we lovingly call our dark roast Betties, are going to want to read some of these studies that we've been talking about. So I'll make sure that they're linked in the show notes, but tell us a little bit about where we can find more about Timeline.
Yeah. Before I do, there's one thing I think I forgot to say that I think is important for people is just sort of the cleanliness of the product, right? And that there are no, I think that's, those of us that are very cautious about what we put in our bodies are also very cautious about what we put on our skin as well. And so, over 80% of this is all from natural ingredients, natural origin of ingredients. And if your readers are sort of familiar with Skin Deep, the environmental working group, we got evaluated on a different app called Yuka, which is more of like,
I love
we're
Yuka.
Swiss-based, so it's
yes.
Yeah. So we have, I think it's like a 93 score for cleanliness on Yuka.
Great.
So yeah. So that is also equally as important. We want things that work, but things that also are going to not bombard yourself with,
not add to that
harsh
toxic
fragrances
load. Yeah. With personal
Totally.
care products. I mean, this is an entire podcast unto itself, but there is, women in general, we have hair products, we have skin products, we have, whatever. We have all these different things that we have nails. We have all the different things that we are constantly slathering on ourselves. No studies on the combinant, like when we have all of these different 5, 6, 10, 20 products that we're using on a daily basis, what that does to our health. So I love that you received such a high score. I use the Yuka app as well. It's great.
Great. Yeah. So I just want to make sure anyone who's concerned about
great.
that.
I'm glad you brought that
so
up.
where you can, so where you can get it is on our website, which is timeline.com. So it's all one word, timeline.com. I believe we are offering your listeners a discount, right?
Yes, we are. And I don't know what that is off the top. It'll be in the show notes. We'll make sure we get it. It'll be in the show notes.
In the show notes. Yep. I believe, we'll get that. But so they can go to timeline.com. They can purchase both the skin and nutrition there. It's right on our website. If you go into the top nav and you go into science, there's a page which will take you to all the published research. So all of our published research is open access. So you can go, you can nerd out to your heart's content on every detail of the study. But for those who don't want to nerd out, but just want like a refresher, we've done some really lovely work to just kind of like high level just basically high level kind of reinforce everything that I just talked about today, both on the body and on the skin. So that reminder of like, what is mitophagy? How does it work? There's some great resources there for you.
For my light rose Betties.
And
my Betties that don't care about the papers. They're just like, tell me what to do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does it work? What does it do?
Yeah.
How am I going to feel? What am I going to see?
Great.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. This has been enlightening. I learned, as I usually do, I learned quite a bit from you. So thank you so much for your time. And we will make sure that all of that is in the show notes for our readers to check out.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
All right. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And I must give you the obligatory legal and medical disclaimer here. This podcast, Better with Dr. Stephanie, is for general information only. And the advice, recommendations we discuss do not replace medicine, chiropractic, or any other primary healthcare provider's advice, treatment, or care. In the consumption of this podcast, there is no doctor-patient relationship that has been formed, and the use and implementation of the information discussed are at the sole discretion of the listener. The information and opinions shared on this podcast are not intended to be a substitute for primary care, diagnosis, or treatment. In other words, guys, be smart about this. Take it with a grain of salt. Take this information to your primary healthcare provider and have a discussion with him or her to make the best choice that is for you. Remember, I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. And these conversations are meant for educational purposes only.